If this is your first time joining us, hello. If you've been here before, welcome back. We're super excited to be here. My name is Andrea. I am your moderator for this evening, alongside Katie and Austin, who will be introducing themselves momentarily. And we are a very small portion of Inspira Advantage. So tonight's discussion is how to navigate med school application timelines, an incredibly important topic. So we're super excited that you found the time in your evening and your day to sit with us and chat and be part of the discussion. Just before we actually go into the discussion, just a couple of housekeeping rules. First and foremost, this webinar is recorded. What does that mean? It means you will receive a copy in your inbox within a day or two of this webinar. In terms of how long we're running tonight's webinar, we're looking at running it for an hour because we have a lot to talk about. So we'll be speaking about mapping out your timeline. So when to move forward with the critical steps. We'll be speaking about how to stay organized. We'll be speaking about avoiding common delays. All of this alongside a Q&A towards the end. So definitely get to your questions in the chat. Austin and Katie are absolutely experts. Again, they'll introduce themselves momentarily, and you will see what I mean. And they'll be able to get to all of your wonderful questions. Before I pass it off to them, as I mentioned, we are Inspira Advantage. So we just want to take a quick moment to share a little bit about who we are, because we recognize there's a ton of new faces in the room. We are a globally recognized admissions consulting and test prep firm with over 16 years of experience. We specialize in helping students get admission to top graduate healthcare programs such as medicine, residency, dental, veterinary, PA, nursing school, all with a 94% acceptance rate, something we're incredibly proud of. We believe in starting early, which is why we offer something called pre-health advising for college freshmen. Our team helps students build a tailored academic timeline, including course selection and GPA strategy, find impactful experiences like research, shadowing, clinical and non-clinical volunteering, extracurriculars, and those important leadership roles as well. We help make their applications stand out from the rest with a stellar personal statement and interview prep as well. What these steps do, is they lay a foundation to differentiate our applicants and help them leave a lasting impression. In addition, our tutors provide personalized one-on-one test prep for MCAT, DAT, and GRE. With diagnostic tests, custom study plans, and interim progress tracking, students often see a score increase of I believe the average is of 15 points on the MCAT with 45 plus hours of tutoring. Our 60-hour program even offers score guarantees of 515 on the MCAT. All of this has been said and done. It's time to actually apply, which is why we have something called our all-inclusive application program, which offers unlimited support through the entire application cycle. So this includes crafting a personalized school list and narrative, perfecting personal statements and secondary essays with unlimited edits, providing interview prep, scholarship guidance, and waitlist strategy. We're very much by our student side until they receive their acceptance. Our goal is very clear. It's very simple. It's to not only create the most competitive candidates, but applications as well, ensuring our students shine in this ever competitive admissions landscape. If you're interested in learning more about who we are, we offer personalized consultations via video, phone, or email. No matter where you are in the application process, we're ready, we're willing, and we're really excited to get going and help you out and support you in any way possible. With that being said, Katie, Austin, whichever one of you wants to take it away.
Yeah, sure. I'll start. I'm Katie. I am in my 4th of 6 years in plastic and reconstructive surgery residency at University of Wisconsin after going to medical school at VCU School of Medicine in Richmond, Virginia. Thanks for having us tonight. Thanks for letting us talk at you. Hopefully this is helpful. I have a background in education in addition to pre-med stuff in undergrad. And I've been doing this as an admissions counselor in medical school, but also as a interviewer, and I sit on the selection committee for the residency as well. So have a lot of experience. Hopefully we can be helpful here tonight.
Yeah, to piggyback, I'm Austin. I'm a little bit earlier in my journey. I'm a first-year dermatology resident, which really isn't dermatology. Very weird. Not the part of this webinar, but I went to Stanford for med school, going to Stanford for derm, and I think this webinar represents the most important thing that is not up to chance that you can increase your chances of success with. Timelines are so important. As we mentioned, the ever competitive atmosphere. This is going to be a really important series of panels and slides to remember.
All right, I will get us started. So as Austin mentioned, our topic tonight will be mostly about timeline and how to optimize and what things go where and what you can do to try and reduce problems along that timeline. So when you're designing that roadmap or that timeline we're referring to for the pre-med kind of the entire pre-med component and also the more acute period leading up to your application, what you want to do when you're thinking about any of these things is kind of design backwards. So start from the points that you have hard kind of deadlines on and work backwards using the amount of time you think each step will take. And that kind of gets you to, gives you a timeline of where you need to start and when. And so we'll talk more about the deadlines for, say, like med school admissions and secondaries and stuff like that later. But just thinking about when you start thinking about how much time do I need for each thing, start from the hard cutoffs and move backwards. And then, really appreciating these timelines and deadlines and being organized about this. Not only is to your benefit as an applicant to like stay organized and make sure you're submitting things on time, but it's also demonstrates when you're able to accomplish these things in a timely and efficient way, it demonstrates to medical schools that you are, detail oriented and organized and all of that as well. Well, let's see if I can advance it. There we go.
There we go. Okay. Now, getting more into the details of those timelines, you're going to have deadlines. You're going to have milestones. But what do you do with those besides complete them? I think this slide is really focusing on the opportunity that you have for not only meeting the milestones necessary to even get to applying to med school, but also those that can represent your personal growth. I think it's very similar if you look even further out. When you get into residency, make it to fellowship, whatever you're doing, you always have deadlines that can also be seen as personal growth milestones. So in that sense, even though it is a lot of work and you have to do specific things to check boxes, you should also consider this timeline and the milestones within it as a means to continually evaluate your both growth mindset and your achievements in making that growth happen despite all the things that you have to do. This should really be a self-propelling manifestation of what you want to do for the rest of your life.
So there is going to be so many things that you are going to need to keep track of. Not just need to keep track of, but want to keep track of, make sure you're doing as efficiently as possible. And not just doing each thing, but doing each thing, what we call in medicine, like triaging. Like some things are going to need to take priority over others, and how do you decide which those are and where to organize those. And so it's imperative, I think, that you create some kind of organizational tool. It's really not doable to just keep all these things in your head and assume that you're going to stay on top of all of this. So I recommend, some folks I've worked with have used like Excel spreadsheets, but really any digital calendars, or there's like task keeping apps, whatever it is that best suits you. You need something that will allow you to work in the short term and the long term. But just find whatever it may be that helps you stay organized, helps you keep track of deadlines, gets your check boxes checked off, and allows you to really accomplish these tasks in a timely manner.
Yeah, jumping off of that, this whole idea of a master document or primary document, whatever you want to call it, I think was the key to any success, because you're going to be encountering a ton of things. We'll get into a little bit more details later on, but these all have different deadlines. There's rolling admissions, there's requests that you have to send to other people, and there's drafts that you're doing. If you can find a way to organize it that works well for you and isn't necessarily a cookie cutter template, that's super important. Some people are better with documents. Some people are better with Excel spreadsheets or the Google versions of those. But if you find a way to keep tabs, pun intended, on your work and progress, that's going to alleviate a lot of stress and actually give you more brain power to put towards the content creation side of your application. And the same goes for streamlining communication. You have to consider all those outside benefactors and people who may be influencing your journey on the way to med school and supporting and advocating for you at that level of the admissions committee, whether that's letter of recommendation writers and how busy they may be, or having committees at your school. Some have pre-health committees that create this committee letter that stands in for the letters of recommendation. And also thinking about things like test prep. Who are you going to be your mentors, your tutors? How are you going to set this timeline up? And how can you streamline communication with them as well? And on the back end, also thinking about communicating with schools at the appropriate times, letters of intent, letters of interest, post-interview communications, all that sort of stuff. If you can get the right system in place now, it's going to help you the entire year you're applying.
I'll just add one little logistical piece. I think the streamlining communication, a tip that I would have too, more specific, is some folks have more than one email. So you might have a school email and a Gmail. Yeah. Decide which one is more accessible to you and only use that email for all of your medical school application content, because things can get really confusing. Things can get lost when emails are coming to you in different locations. You can't find things that you need. I would also recommend that you can create like specific folders in your Gmail or your email or whatever, and just put everything in one place so that when you need to reference back to something, or you need to find an address, whatever it is, everything is in one place. And so that's an organizational thing, but it also helps with communication, I think. So some things that you should know about that may derail your timeline. So just in general, I would say before I even go into these, you should have buffer zones at each point in your timeline. So if you think, so for example, MCAT usually takes about 6 weeks for the score to come back. You should have buffer zones on both ends of that. And just assume that there's going to be some delay. And that will just make it so that you're prepared in case there is a delay, or worse, best case scenario is there's no delay and everything works out exactly either early or on time. So just make sure you have buffer zones everywhere. Some things that may derail your timeline. So taking the MCAT late, perhaps you can't get the dates or the locations that you're interested in. And so your MCAT scheduling is a little bit late, and or the scores are released later than expected. These two things can throw off your timeline. The other thing we always recommend with students is that you should take your MCAT with enough time to get the score back and then potentially retake if needed. That should be built into your timeline. So for example, this year AMCAS opens on May 1st and you can submit by May 28th. You should have taken your MCAT at the latest in February. That way you have time to have score back and potentially retake and get score back theoretically before you submit. It's a tight timeline, but build in some buffer or do something that allows you to accommodate for that. But that's the kind of thing we're talking about when we say like build in buffer and watch out for those things that could derail you. Other things that can sometimes take longer than expected, slow recommendation letters. So, it's not that technically challenging to write a recommendation letter, but the people that you are asking them from are generally very busy folks. So it may not be their first priority to write you this letter. And it may require multiple kind of gentle probings to get them emails to get them to do it. And I've had letter writers personally take more than 3 months to write it because I have to keep kind of bothering them about it. And that's okay. It's not anything, personal. It's just like they're busy. People are busy, and this is like not always on their highest of priorities. So just be aware that this may take longer than expected. Secondary applications. So most schools, and we'll talk more about this, I think there's another slide later about this, but most schools almost reflexively send out secondary applications after you submit your primary. There are a few exceptions to that. There are a few schools that actually review your primary and have cutoffs and whatnot that you may not get secondaries from, but you can just kind of assume that everywhere you apply to with your primary application, you'll receive a secondary from. And you want to get those secondary essay responses back as soon as possible with the best response possible. And we'll talk about some things you can do to facilitate the efficiency there, but just keep in mind that secondaries are a way that you could delay your application. And then there can always be technical issues. These are online websites. They get overloaded with people at times, and you may not be able to submit when you think you are ready to just because of technical issues. Or make sure all your transcripts are submitted and sections are all completed properly. Otherwise, they would return that to you as a thing that still needs to be completed, and that could delay your application as well.
Yeah, Katie said it best. This buffer period stuff is a real thing. And you also have to assess the overlap that could potentially happen between deadlines and buffer periods, such as, for example, what we have in these next 3 to 6 months where deadlines start melding together. Your MCAT, letters of recommendation, starting on the primary, submitting, and then secondaries hit you like a wall in June and July. So if you don't have that formulated into a document to see the overlap that can potentially happen, you may fall behind, which can be, academically fatal in some cases if you get too far behind. And I think with that, Katie was also touching on a specific example of an MCAT contingency plan. What if it doesn't go as well? Obviously, we always want to prepare for success or hope for success and prepare for adversity. I don't like the whole prepare for the worst sort of thing, but you will have adversity, right? So how do you address, predict, and respond to those weak spots? Whether it's letters coming in late, secondaries that are really, really long. Certain schools are super long secondaries, and so you have to be ready for that too. And then also, when are you going to ask for help? This is one of those journeys that oftentimes, and I would say nearly all the time, you should have some help in, whether you're at this webinar, have a pre-health advisor, have a mentor through us, through your family. Checking in with someone to keep you both accountable and on track is super, super important and allows you to build the contingency plans with someone else alongside you.
Amazing. So I just want to do a quick check-in and give everyone just a moment to digest that, because I think some golden nuggets, as much as I dislike that term, are definitely being dropped tonight. I don't see any questions in the chat, but again, if you have any kind of questions, we'd love to hear from you. Put them in the chat. We'll make sure we get to them. And just a quick note before I pass it off to Katie and Austin again. We just want to thank you for being here. So we'd like to offer you a 10% off discount on any one of our really incredible programs, 10 off web. It does not expire, so definitely keep that in mind. Additionally, the QR code leads you back to an opportunity to book a one-on-one. It's a free consultation with one of my incredible colleagues, or I should say our incredible colleagues, who can really sit down with you and work through any sort of questions that you have, whether that be, of course, about a mentor with us, a counselor with us, a tutor with us, or even something about your application process or the admissions process in general. So we want to make sure that you do have that support outside of this webinar as well. I'll leave it back to our wonderful panelists. I'm sorry, I don't know which one of you.
I think it's my turn.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
Austin and I, having been on admissions committees, there are some things that stand out in an application that are not just content, perhaps, although of course content is important. I'm not going to say that that's not, but there are some things in addition to content, I guess I'll say, that stand out. And one of those things is a well-paced application. And what that means is that not all of your activities are within the last 6 months. In general, it is much better, from my perspective on the admissions committee, to see an application in which an applicant has demonstrated longitudinal interest or passion in an area, or in an active service, or perhaps a job, whatever it may be. It is much more meaningful to me, and I think helps me understand the applicant better with longitudinal kind of activities. And so a pacing of an application or your activities in the process of your pre-med prior to your application is really shines for me, and helps me understand that you have this longitudinal interest in the field and it's not just something you decided on, say, this year. That sometimes happens too, but if you can arrange it, longitudinal, kind of longer kind of engagement in these activities is better. And then in addition to that, while over this long period, your application is, yes, just a one-time submission, but really it's a reflection of what you've done over the prior 4 or 5 years, whatever it may be. And we would like to see consistency in academics, so instead of large fluctuations. Now, it is the case that often grades improve over the course of your studies, and that is a great trend to see as well. If not that, we'd at least like some stability, consistency in your scores and your grades and whatnot, and that helps us feel confident that as a medical student, you'll be able to do those same things and be able to compete. and kind of keep up with the rigorous academic content. And, consistency not only in your grades, but also in your engagements and activities and personal growth. So let's say you have a job that you have a job on your application that you've been at for 3 years. It's really nice. Ideally, it's not always possible, but it's really nice to see growth throughout that period. So I started as this position, and over the years I advanced in this way. And it really just makes you stand out as a candidate.
Okay. Now, more specifically, the thing I'm going to emphasize the most out of all the content here is that you need, and I use need specifically, to apply as early as possible. Day one and within 2 weeks of receiving secondaries. Like, that is a non-negotiable for success that you actually have control over. The people on the admissions committees, they may have a bad day. You may get bad luck. You may not be a good fit for a certain school, but you can guarantee that you have given yourself the most advantage in the setting of rolling admissions by applying as early as possible. That takes going beyond the deadlines that are set on AMCAS and school websites and actually creating your own deadlines. And while it's great to have, of course, these soft deadlines to give you a buffer period, I want you to think of those as like not soft as in you can just, move past them and not worry, but think of those as your deadlines for success. Because if you just follow what's on the websites, you're going to be far behind. And that's something that you should just take out as a variable. There's so much that you may not be able to control, but this is something you can. To that point, secondaries is where I see the most applicants falter, because they are hit with an onslaught of essays. Yes, the personal statement's hard. Yes, the activities need to be polished. But when you're hit with multiple secondaries in a day with several hundred words each for your responses that are unique prompts, you can often get discouraged and get behind. So thankfully, nowadays, not back in my day, but nowadays, there's some really, really good databases for secondary prompts, and can show which ones are static, which ones are changing, which ones you can predict and pre-write. And I think that's super important, and one thing that often gets missed amid like preparing for personal statements and all of the primary. And I think hearing about all this is probably getting your cortisol up a little bit, and it gets mine up too for you. But it is very doable, and it's even more doable when you take care of yourself through this. And for that reason, as much as you can, I recommend taking this application time, and honestly, the entire year you're applying, especially the first 6 months, as a time for yourself and for your application. And sometimes that means pulling back from social events, but more so prioritizing nutrition, health, fitness, those things that are going to keep your brain going forward and keep your energy up. You're probably already very busy at this point, and I understand it's even more competitive out there than when I was there. But I think this idea of well-being, and for us as residents, burnout prevention is like a really, really key thing that helps us remain successful, good learners, and ultimately achieve what we want to in life.
Yeah, I would just add, this process is a little bit of like hurry up and wait sometimes. So there'll be intense periods of like activity and focus, and like every night I'm coming home and working on something, and then you submit, and there is seemingly just as intense periods of like just sit and wait for the next thing. And there's always things you can be working on, sure, but there are certainly will be periods of, okay, I've got these things ready, and now I just have to wait and hear back. And during those periods, even though it feels like it's hard to relax, those are your times to try and check back in with your loved ones or check back in with yourself, whatever it may be. Take time to engage in whatever it is that you find kind of fulfilling and refreshing, and do those things. So you're able to find time for it. You just need to find the balance a little bit, and try, gotta look to find that balance. So importantly, that we're talking about this timeline is not the same for everyone. So not only do you need to adjust for your strengths and weaknesses, I would say adjust to the things that you like doing and don't like doing. So for example, some people really like writing, and they love the idea of writing a personal statement is enjoyable to them. Not for me, can't relate, but but some people really enjoy it, and so they will find time to do that, and it won't take them as long as it'll take me. I know that for me, a personal statement takes absolutely months. Like the minimum is 3 months, because I need to look at it 1,000 times. I need to write a couple versions that I decide I hate and then rewrite it. So I know that that is going to be different for me than perhaps it is for Austin or whoever else. So personalize your timeline. You know yourself better than anyone else could. If you know something is going to take you a long time because you're A, not good at it, or B, don't like it, give yourself enough time to really do well and succeed at that. Whatever that may be. Potentially, if you're not super happy with your MCAT practice scores, build in that buffer time to just know that if I don't do as well as I want to do today, I have time to figure this out still, whatever it may be. So shift that timeline accordingly. And then some schools, goes back to the triage or prioritization kind of component. Some schools are maybe like they are your absolute, gold tier 1 schools that you want to go to. Perhaps you prioritize their secondaries over someone else's. Perhaps or some schools have tighter rolling admissions than other schools. There may be times where you need to change your priority in terms of, regardless of when you receive the secondary or whatever it may be. And that will sometimes change your timeline a bit. So I think we have a slide coming up, but being flexible is important here.
Yeah. I will say you're going to have stress in your application, but there is a certain amount that you can either avoid or reduce by doing just a few key things that are relatively easy in the grand scheme of things. And that's number one. We kind of talked about buffers, assuming things are going to take longer than expected, whether it's MCAT score being delayed, transcript processing being behind, or any number of things that can go wrong that are out of your hands. Just know that that may and can and possibly will happen. And just knowing, again, like to the extent that you can, get the earliest stuff done, get that ball rolling. Assume things will take longer than expected. So actually start those things earlier. Those things that are outside your control have different variables at play. And I mentioned this previously. You will be hit with secondaries like no other come around July time period. And pre-writing reduces stress. Pre-writing prepares you to fire right back. It's oftentimes what I describe a hot potato between you two. And you want to get that back to the sender as soon as possible, but in a quality way. And pre-writing really allows you to do that. And there will be this lull period where you submit your primary, you're done with the personal statement, this is the activities, and you submit everything, and you're kind of waiting for those secondaries to trickle or flow in. That's when you should be hitting it hard already and just keep the ball rolling, keep the momentum, the inertia going. And then finally, across every single thing you do, whether it's a mundane input of your classes and grades or the key thesis in your personal statement, double check, triple check, quadruple check everything. There is so much room for mistakes that can cause big delays and big errors in your overall application. And some of those, oftentimes, most of those can be remediated by just double checking, triple checking something. And not so much that you want to delay anything, but you really want to take matters into your own hands because there's going to be so much out of your control, as I've mentioned prior.
So building a timeline that works for you. This is a bit about the personalization that we've already touched on. It's important, of course, to identify which year, which application cycle you might be interested in. And that seems like a straightforward question, but it's sometimes not. Really, it's about application optimization and how much time that may or may not take you. And that's not just grades, that's also experiences, letters of recommendation, all of these things, hours you're trying to get in both a job experience, but also volunteer opportunities and research and all of that. So, and can you do all of that and get a good MCAT score, which is of vital importance. I made the mistake of trying to continue to work 3 jobs and take a full load of classes and take my MCAT. Guess what? Didn't turn out great the first time. Learned my lesson the hard way. So, sometimes it can be challenging, but the mature decision is to give yourself a gap year and give yourself the time to do the things you need to do to optimize your application. plastic surgery, we talk about the best chance you have of getting a skin graft to take is the first time you do it. And so this is what I think about med school applications too. The best chance you have of getting in is the first time you do it, because when you have to apply additional times, the bar gets set, unfortunately, higher and higher. So identify your application cycle and make sure you can meet all of those expectations in the timeline that requires. We talked about reverse engineering. It was one of the first things we talked about. Reverse engineer your timeline to account for all of these components that could delay you. Your MCAT scores, your letter of recommendations, and all of these experiences that you're going to include in your application. And work backwards. Make sure you have enough time to do all those things and do them well. And then we talked about not only referring to the hard deadlines that are applications, but set yourself some soft deadlines that are just for you that will keep you in check. And I honestly think, for me at least personally, and I find for clients as well, it is better to have someone to hold you accountable. Because if it's just you and yourself in that timeline and Excel sheet, no one knows if you missed it. I think it's a little bit easier to slide on things. So if you can have an accountability buddy to make sure that you are meeting these things, whether that's your parent or someone else going through the process with you, make sure that you've got someone to keep you accountable for these soft deadlines at each step.
Okay. I think the big takeaways on this slide are, on the surface, contradictory, right? We're talking about deadlines. We're talking about being early. We're talking about being strict and proactive. But at the same time, about a quarter to a third of the things that'll happen will be out of your control. And so building flexibility into that mindset when those variables are external ones that you cannot control is just as important as holding on to those variables you can control and maximizing your proactivity in those areas. There will be stress along the way. If you can eliminate the unnecessary stress, it's very survivable, possibly, may I say, even thrivable, though it's never fun to do all this stuff. But you can and will succeed if you stick to the principles here and you have a great story to go along with it. Speaking about the strength of applications, I think, again, I've probably said this 5 times, but I'm going to say it a 6th time. The well-timed application elevates you immediately, regardless of what you put in that application. Now, you want it to be polished. You want it to be triple checked. You want it to be cohesive and as strong as you can. But if you're rushing at the end, you have the potential not only to miss things, but also just decrease the overall quality of it. Some people thrive under deadlines, right? And keeping people accountable, like Katie said, is oftentimes a good thing. But if you're really rushing at the end, that often dissolves into just kind of a madness, in a rush to fill things out. So please, 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 as much as you can, don't do that. You have so much out of your control in this process. I just want to see you all control it and succeed. And this is one of the elements that you can maximize.
Thank you. So before we go into the Q&A, we would love to hear back from you. We have a quick survey on the screen. You will also receive this in a follow-up. I promise you it's only a couple of questions, not a couple, but a few questions long, and it really allows us to take back important moments, important feedback, take that back to our team, improve the process, and just continue to offer better guidance in future sessions, right? Excuse me. So please, we would absolutely really appreciate that. So, your questions answered. The Q&A, I think this is everybody's favorite part. We have a ton of questions in the chat. So there's a question here. Austin, you answered it in the chat, but I think it's really important that we say it out loud for those viewing at home as well who don't have access to the chat. But somebody asked us, from the time applications open, is there an ideal time to submit? And then there's also sort of a follow-up question. How long would you say it would take to complete primary applications, given you have everything organized prior to application release date? So it's a 2-part question.
So I'll just add to, so Austin said basically as soon as you can, which is totally I agree, correct answer. As long as everything is at the quality that you want it to be at. I'll just say, so I think this year applications open on May 1st and are able to be submitted first on May 28th. So you have a period where applications are open prior to being able to submit. So during that time frame is the time where you are able to input everything. Now, that doesn't mean you should only work on this for a month. So you can prepare, obviously, your personal statement. You can even start pre-writing, your descriptions at least, or summarizing descriptions of your work experiences, volunteer experiences, all these things that are going to be in your primary application. Those you can start on ahead of time. But the time to fill out the application physically is between the 1st and the 28th of May this year. Those dates change a little bit year to year. So you should submit by May 28th, theoretically. If you have everything together and it's the quality that you want and you have all the information you need, ideally you submit the first day that's possible to do, like Austin said. I think if you have everything ready to go and your stuff is all organized and completed, and all you have to do is input things and maybe polish and reread, it doesn't take long to physically input it. It's really just the compiling of the information and polishing and completing things that takes a long time.
I was just answering a couple of these. There technically isn't a latest date for retaking the MCAT. The keyword I'm picking up on is retaking, and this is where Katie was bringing up as early as possible. I personally, the latest date I took the MCAT, I think it was either late April or the first week of May, and then you factor in that 6 weeks of scoring. That fits right when your primary is being processed, and it kind of automatically gets added into your primary. So I would say that would be my soft deadline on that. I don't know if you want to go far past that, because then you run into potential delays.
Yeah, I will add, so there is the possibility of you can apply with a primary application without a completed MCAT score, and that is a possibility. Now, that is in my mind, subpar, like not ideal situation. I think having your unless all of your practice tests give you the exact same score every time, which maybe you do, but in my opinion, you really should have your MCAT score in hand prior to applying, as it helps you select what schools you're appropriate for, in my opinion. And it depends on the applicant. But so I would not recommend applying prior to having your MCAT score, though it is something that you can do. The latest, like Austin said, the latest date you can reapply is generally 6 weeks prior to, or excuse me, you can retake is 6 weeks prior to and still perhaps have a score prior to submission of your application. I would just say that's not building in a lot of buffer zone. I would give yourself a little bit of time, but that's totally accurate. I would just be really careful about coming so close to your kind of deadlines.
Amazing. Okay, next question. What can you give letter writers who are a bit confused about what to emphasize? Are there any guidelines we can send them?
I think that question is also important to contextualize who your letter writers are. Are they a science professor? Are they your PI? Are they a language arts professor? And from that end, I could understand what you're saying about like a bit confused about what to emphasize. But one thing that you can help guide whoever that may be is to potentially give them a draft of your personal statement, meet with them beforehand to discuss why you're going into medicine, give them a resume, CV, or even bullet points that they can potentially utilize to build around anecdotally your values or principles of resilience, adaptability, and giving examples just to help them along. There's multiple ways to do that, but I think the more that you develop that relationship, the easier it is. And in cases where they're confused, I would suggest really connecting with that person on as much detail as you can to make sure that they understand why you're applying to med school and why you're a good fit.
I'll add too, when I'm designing an application, my own or one of my students' applications, there is a there is a document, I believe it's on AAMC, that outlines all of the characteristics that we are looking for in medical school applicants. And there's a list of like basically character traits that you want to highlight as part of your application, strengths that you want to highlight that would make a good medical student. And you know, there are things like Austin mentioned, like resiliency, problem solving, interpersonal communication, things like that, and teamwork, things like that. So my advice is to keep all of those character traits in mind when you're writing your application, and try with each experience to hit on different ones that you want to demonstrate that you have. And I do the same thing with letter writers. So for example, if I have a research PI, perhaps I want them to really focus on my ability to problem solve, my resiliency when issues came up with the research that we were doing, my like longitudinal, you know, interest in academics or like scientific curiosity, and perhaps, I don't know what else, innovation or something like that. So I pick a couple of traits that I think this person would be well suited to speak about me in, and when I send the email that's like requesting the letter, I will, like Austin said, include my CV, include my personal statement, summarize perhaps my role in that either lab or class or whatever it may be, and then be like, you know, things that it depends on your relationship. Obviously, feel it out. If you're not close enough with them to recommend kind of highlights, then don't do it. But if you are close enough with them, perhaps you've worked with them long enough to be like, some things that it would be really great if you could speak on would be these topics. And some people feel actually like very grateful that you've like kind of narrowed their topic for their letter. So I would just consider that. It's not rude, depending on the relationship, but it's generally not received as rude to kind of give them a couple of things that you'd hope that they could highlight for them. And usually they're totally fine with that and happy to address it. So it depends on what their role is and what your relationship is with them, but there's definitely some things that you can look to guide them.
Amazing. And I see some really awesome discussions happening in the chat, which makes me happy. So somebody asked, how can you pre-write secondary essays? Are there resources that provide prompts? I'd love to throw out and kind of pitch yourselves. We actually do have a resource with all of the most up-to-date prompts, but I'll kind of give it back to Katie and Austin to elaborate on what pre-writing secondary essays could look like.
Yeah, so like we said, Inspira has this prompt. You can also, I'm sure they are floating around online somewhere, but basically secondary applications, I think there's a question above that's like, can you, maybe Austin already answered it. There's a question above, like, what are secondary applications? Basically, each school that you apply to generally sends you an additional application that are some range between like 3 to 10 even short response like essays that are specific to the school. And those prompts are, for most places, largely unchanged from year to year or minimally changed from year to year. So if you can get your hands on one of these, they're not hard to, but get your hands on one of these documents that has all of the secondary prompts, say from this application cycle, once you submit your primary application, you can just start writing and assume that they will be very similar for your application cycle. There may be some changes, and you should just assume that there's going to be 1 or 2 essays that will be different, and then you'll have to come up with on the fly. But pre-writing the majority of these essays is going to allow you to get them back to the school in a timely manner. Austin mentioned 2 weeks. I think that is like a hard stop for me. If you can get them before a week, yes, like even better. So these are, again, like Austin said earlier, as soon as possible is how fast you get them back to the schools, because the earlier the school sees them, just like primary applications, the earlier you can be reviewed and the more likely you are to be selected for an interview. Now, again, that's always being balanced with the quality of the work. It's not better to get it back in 2 days and have kind of spelling errors and stuff in it, but keeping that in mind. So pre-write them just based on like last year's application, secondary applications. And you can find those kind of wherever. Inspira can, I think did we put a link in last time, or do we have a link available?
Yeah,
I threw one in there.
Oh,
yeah,
thanks.
The link is in the chat, and they will receive a link in the follow-up with this recording as well. So we want to make sure that
perfect.
Provide
on
that
top
as well.
of it, Austin.
So I'd love to just ask a general question, right? So looking back on your own timelines and your own application process, what's one thing you wish you had started earlier?
Everything. uh, for me, it's everything. I didn't have great mentors. I didn't have pre-med advisors. I didn't really know what I was doing. Everything took me a little longer. I mean, honestly, that's the reason I joined Inspira, was because I definitely took the hard way around to get here. And so I kind of know a lot about the process because I had to fail first at everything. I would say definitely the things that I would recommend that I would have liked to have done better is done a better job having like a longitudinal application. So I like realized what I needed to do to apply and all these requirements for hours and whatnot. And I got them all basically within the last year, and it just doesn't look good. I think it made my application look weaker. And it just doesn't look great from a admissions committee perspective. So you guys are all in the right boat. You're like here early. The earlier you can start like optimizing your application, the better.
Yeah. I would say the same exact thing as Katie. I think hindsight being 2020, you start those things that you fall in love with and are passionate about the first time you set foot on campus. That's optimized, perfect environment. But building off of that too, I think Katie already touched on this during our webinar slides. These letters of rec, even if you ask them like a month or two in advance, which is like, oh my gosh, I gave them so much time. You need more time. You need to double what you're thinking, because these are very, very busy people. And it just gets lost. And it's by no fault of you or the person. It's not that they like you less. It's just they have life in addition to professorship, in addition to family, in addition to whatever else. And giving them enough time and enough heads up has a dual-fold benefit. Number one, you're going to get it on time. But number two, they're going to start thinking about you for a longer time, right? They're actually going to be percolating, whether consciously or subconsciously, about your strengths, your weaknesses. Potentially, if you're in a class with them, they're thinking about your performance and watching you closer. So if you drop that seed early on and then give them a soft deadline that's ahead of the actual AMCAS deadline, that sets yourself up for success from that third person perspective.
So I'd love to ask a question regarding on the flip side, for those individuals who might be feeling sort of behind in the process, because obviously it's a lot. It's very easy to get discouraged. We hear that day in, day out, whether that's through these webinars, or I'm sure you hear these stories as well. So yeah, absolutely, especially with the chaos that is, well, whether you're a traditional student or a non-traditional student, it's chaos. How do you recommend people catch up? Or kind of fall back in line with the timeline?
Yeah, I'll start by saying all the things that we talk about, not just in this webinar, but in all of our webinars that we have, in case you have been to others or plan to come to others, are like the ideal situation. Yeah, ideally you have all of these hours in every single realm of your application. It's just, it's not real life. It's like, ideally, if you can optimize it, try to do these things. But it's not real life. No one's application is perfect. Every single application I've ever worked on or come across has weaknesses and strengths. So it's okay to feel like it, in my personal opinion, like my personal experience as well, you always feel like you're not quite doing enough. It's not a great feeling. It's just unfortunately part of the process, because everyone you're with is, you know, highly competitive and driven folks. So there's a realm of like, you totally have a reasonable application. You are doing enough. It just feels like you're not. And then there are times when, for whatever reason, you came to medicine late, or, you know, you have other obligations that have delayed things. Perhaps your application isn't quite ready, even though you'd like it to be. And I've had to work with students on this too. Sometimes, as much as you don't want to delay things further, you've just worked so hard on your undergrad degree and you are ready and passionate about medicine. Sometimes you need to take a step back and think about what the mature decision is. What is going to be the best chance for you to become a doctor? And it seems like, I just want to apply so I can get started. And I totally understand that feeling. But sometimes the mature decision and the best decision to optimize your chances is to take a year And I'm not saying that that's correct for everyone, but if you truly don't have the numbers or the experiences or the application that you want to apply that you think will give you the best chance, then perhaps a gap year to strengthen your application is something to consider.
As Katie said before, think like a plastic surgeon with skin grafts.
Yes, your best chance is your first.
Amazing. I'll let everyone kind of we have about 10 minutes or so, so just give everyone a few more moments to get in any sort of last minute questions. Austin, Katie, is there anything you'd like to add that maybe we haven't covered in any of these slides?
Mm-hmm.
I think I've somehow weaseled in all my little tips and tricks, and my words of advice. Like I said, your application's not going to be perfect. It shouldn't be. That would be odd. So it's really easy to get bogged down in the I must not be doing enough, and kind of taking that personally. I must not be enough, and that's just not the case. You guys are doing great. Just keep doing your best, and you will be able to put your best foot forward. It's a hard, challenging process. We're here for you at Inspira, and fingers crossed for all of you. Good luck in the process. Yeah, I don't think I have much more. What do you got, Austin?
I got the old Yoda quote, do or do not, there is no try. So if you go for something, you are actually going for that thing. I don't like when I hear, oh, I'm trying to apply to med school. No, you're applying. You're actually applying to med school. And if you're making that effort, make that effort worthwhile.
Yeah.
And I think it took me actually surprisingly a long time to understand that quote, because I was like, well, what is that? Like, everyone's trying to do better, but in that process, you're actually doing something to get better. So do that with purpose, with dedication, with an idea that deliberate effort is going to result in something. So that's what I'll get on it.
End, Austin. That was great.
Soapbox. I stopped my soapbox early.
Encore.
Absolutely. I think that was a perfect place to end tonight's webinar. Austin, we're going to have that on repeat on social media because mic drop.
I'm not famous yet.
Mic drop. Absolutely. Folks, that is it for tonight. Katie, Austin, Katie. Just happened to be how you're lined up on my screen. It's both of you, thank you very much for your time. Again, thank you for this awesome discussion. Thank you for being here. To our audience at home and watching the recording, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this webinar, additional questions, whether you respond back via email or book that free consultation that we have available. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to having you on the next webinar. So we do webinars weekly basis, just in case you are new. Next week's, I believe, is about the MCAT. So definitely check out our website, sign up, and yeah, we'll see you again soon.